Did anybody tonight or this weekend or what have you, anybody come home to Centralia for Christmas, whether you came from near or from far? This is my family's fourth Christmas in Centralia, and whether Centralia is home for you or you came home to Centralia, you are a small towner. You can leave the small town, but the small town can't leave you. And my family and I, like I said, this is our fourth Christmas. We've been here for about 3.5 years in Centralia. And of course, there's a big difference coming from the St. Louis area to move here, but there's so many things that we love about small town life, and specifically Centralia. We don't know small town life in any other small town besides Centralia, but it's hard for us to imagine too terribly many small towns that do small town life better than this one. We think that it's just an excellent, excellent place to be and a great place to live. And I think that small towns aren't often the hubs of discussion. Oftentimes our attention is turned toward major metropolitan areas and things of that nature, whether it's about sports or things like that. We don't pay much attention to the small towns, and yet we would notice if they weren't there anymore, right? There's so much good that comes from small towns, so much life and so much benefit for our country and the world and our area as a result of the work and the people of small towns. In fact, we know some of our favorite people of all time come from small towns. Abraham Lincoln was from Hodgenville, Kentucky, population of around 3,000. Dwight Eisenhower was raised in Abilene, Kansas, around 6,000 people. Jimmy Carter was born in Plains, Georgia, which is a population in the hundreds. Dolly Parton was born in Pittman Center, Tennessee. The Pittman Center, Tennessee area in the woods, in a cabin along the stream, that's the closest thing they can even point to if you want to talk about a small town for Dolly Parton. And actress Viola Davis is from St. Matthews, South Carolina, which has a population under 3,000 people. And of course, we know Walt Disney from Marceline, just right up the road from us here in Centralia. You can probably think of a few more of your favorite small towners, but the most significant small town of all that we remember tonight is Bethlehem. And not Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, but Bethlehem in Judea and southern Israel. A small town, so small, in fact, that the prophet Isaiah, hundreds of years before the birth of Jesus, called Bethlehem the most insignificant or the weakest of all of Israel's powers. That's a small town that it's worth mentioning because King David came from this town of Bethlehem. King David, the greatest of all of the kings in the history of Israel, comes from Bethlehem. That's why in the passages that we read around Christmas time, like the one we read tonight, refers to Bethlehem as the town of David or the city of David, because King David came from here. And yet, the prophets, including Micah, the reason Micah talks about Bethlehem is because Micah, the prophet, says from Bethlehem, another King David will come. Isaiah says the same thing. Another King David will come from the line of David, but even greater than David, because this king will have no end to their kingdom in terms of size or in terms of time. This kingdom will never, ever, ever end. And we find this, the culmination of all of this, in Luke chapter 2, perhaps the most famous and well-loved of all of the Christmas stories. Let's see what it says in Luke chapter 2. In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world, and everyone went to their town to register. So Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and line of David. He went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for the baby to be born, and she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger because there was no guest room available for them. And there were shepherds living out in the fields nearby, keeping watch over their flocks at night. An angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified. But the angel said to them, "Do not be afraid. I bring you good news that will cause great joy for all the people. Today in the town of David, a Savior has been born to you. He is the Messiah, the Lord. And this will be a sign to you. you will find a baby wrapped in cloths and lying in a manger." And suddenly a great company of the heavenly host appeared with the angel, praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest heaven, and on earth peace to those on whom his favor rests." Well, I've been to Bethlehem on 3 different occasions in my life, and it might not be exactly the type of place that you expect based on our Western folklore and the songs that we sing. It's vastly different, and it's even more different today, not just because of the tourism that happens because of its fame, but it's also a very, very, very war-torn city in Israel. And it is a very, I would say, a truly difficult place to travel for a variety of reasons. It is just chaos. It's chaos with tourists. It's chaos with people who are trying to take advantage of the tourists and selling things. And that's the Church of the Nativity there, which is built on top of bedrock. And you get in a line to travel through to reach and touch the traditional spot where Jesus was born in Bethlehem. But you're shoulder to shoulder for sometimes, if you're there at the wrong time, for hours on end, literally, to get through this church. It is a very stressful place to be. In fact, we've been there, and people have said that I'm glad that I did that because I can say that I did it, but I have no interest in going back because it just wasn't what I expected. It didn't seem the holy place that I wanted. It didn't seem to be the peaceful place that I desired. I didn't feel the presence and the power of this location like I wanted to. And they expressed no interest in going back because it's just too chaotic for them. And yet I find this to be terribly ironic, horribly ironic, because we are there as tourists getting off of our tour bus with a tour guide taking us through this city that is used to having people coming in and out of it, and there are shops to go to and a church that you can enter into. We've got our little earpieces in so we can hear our tour guide walking us through everything. It pales in comparison to the absolute and utter insanity it would have been for the Holy Family. Bethlehem would have been nuts. Why? Because it's a census. People were traveling all over the place to go to their homes so they can register for the census. People are coming in and out of Bethlehem. And Mary and Joseph take a long, probably inefficient trip from Nazareth to Bethlehem as she's expecting the birth of her child, with no tour bus and no tour guide and no clue where they're going to go once they get there, what they need to do once they do. And it's crazy, so crazy, in fact, that once they get there, there's nowhere for them to go. There's nowhere for them to stay. And so Mary ends up giving birth in what probably would have been a cave that looks something like that. It was used as a barn, but it probably would have actually been a cave. And she gives birth in this place where the animals lived. And she uses a feeding trough as a bassinet. They could probably hear the noise of the animals that were amongst them, and the smell of the animals amongst them, and the hustle and bustle of this town that wasn't quite ready for the chaos that it was experiencing. And it was among this mess, in the middle of this mess, at the center of the chaos, that Jesus was born. In February, my wife gave birth to our first daughter. Her name's Riley, and she was born at Mizzou in what I think is like the Ritz-Carlton of places to give birth. This place is nuts. Like, that's what our birthing suite looks like. This joint was crazy. And it's hard for me this year, as I look at the birthplace of Jesus, it's hard for me to not see the juxtaposition of the birthplace of my daughter compared to the birthplace of the Creator and King of everything. And yet, what I do notice is that despite the excellent care that we received and the positive experience that we had through this birthing process and overall fairly smooth delivery and beyond, is that undoubtedly, as nice as a delivery room like that might be, I have no idea how many moments and hours of chaos have happened in that room? How many moments of desperation and defeat and loss and hurt have happened in that room at the same time as joy and happiness and unbelievable highs? And it just goes to show us that chaos and lack of peace can happen anywhere. It can happen in a small town. It can happen in a big city. It can happen in a cave. It can happen alone, or it can happen in a crowd. I'm sure you know the feeling of not having any peace until there's someone you can hug or someone that you can talk to, and you just won't have peace until you get that, and you feel so alone. And yet, I'll bet you also know what it feels like to feel like you will never have peace unless you have a moment to yourself, and you just need to be alone. See, a lack of peace can happen anywhere. And there are sometimes it's easy to find, and sometimes that it's difficult, but what happens is that peace is altogether elusive. The peace that we long for, that we have in one moment, we don't have in the next. How can we possibly experience peace in the midst of whatever is bringing chaos into our lives and into our world? But church, this is exactly why Jesus was born into the chaos. This God doesn't seclude himself from you and your life and your hurts and your pain. God doesn't remove himself from those who need it most. God is not ignoring the poor. God is not ignoring the hurting. God enters into that life and into the mess and into the chaos to dwell among us. God is not foreign to your pain. God is not foreign to those who are lost or feeling a lack of peace. Jesus, God himself, was born into a lack of peace. A lack of peace so great that Mary and Joseph's relationship wasn't as their culture or religion would have preferred to be having a baby. They found themselves in a cave that was home to animals, in a place that was not home to them, among chaos and among people who, quite frankly, didn't want to be there. They were only there because the government was forcing them to do it. Chaos. How could there be peace? And yet I have to imagine on this night that we celebrate this birth, I have to imagine when Mary gave birth to her son, Jesus, and she held Jesus, Emmanuel, God with us, the creator and savior of the universe, in her arms. The hustle and bustle of Bethlehem must have faded away. The stench of the barn that they were in probably was not quite as pungent when she looked into the face of her son. The stress and fatigue that they were experiencing from what they were going through, a foreign place that they don't know, while trying to deliver a child, must have calmed, if not for a moment. Because she was in the presence of Emmanuel, God with us. And in fact, the first people outside of the Holy Family to hear this news were the shepherds who were working that night, maybe appreciating the fact that they were in the shepherds' fields and not in town as everyone was coming in and out. And these shepherds, when they get this news and they themselves encounter Jesus, they run into the town of Bethlehem and into the mess and into the chaos and into the noise because they have encountered a peace unlike anything they've encountered before. And they have to tell somebody. They are undistracted and unbothered by the noise. They are unbothered by the stress. They are unbothered by the people. They are unbothered by the chaos because of the peace that they have not just seen, but the peace that they now take with them because they met Jesus. This is the kind of peace that Jesus offers. And this Emmanuel, God with us, is still with us, the kind of peace that we can encounter anytime. And in these trips to Bethlehem, one of my favorite places, not in the middle of the chaos, but actually in the shepherd's fields. Because you step under this archway into this path, and in the archway and the walkway to get to the shepherd's fields, there must be laws around there, people's access in and out, because there are people trying to sell you stuff just left and right as you get through. And you step into the field, and it's like you're in a totally different place than you were before. And in the shepherd's fields, there's a chapel. In fact, you'll find, if you go to Israel, all over Israel, if there's a spot that's important, there's a church built on top of it. And in the shepherd's fields, there's a chapel, and it's a very small chapel. Right outside of it, there are vendors trying to live, to make a living. There are people and buses and movement happening all over the place. Noise everywhere, and yet when you step inside, you can experience something like this video that I took the last time I was there. It was hard for me in that moment as I was taking the video to refrain from singing, but because I didn't, you can experience the same peace that I did, and so you are welcome for that. But you see, it was an incredible moment of peace as chaos and noise and madness swirled around us. Through the presence of the Prince of Peace, found a different experience in the middle of the mess, not an escape from it, in the middle of it. We can have peace in the midst of chaos. Why? Because this is exactly why Jesus came. These are exactly the places that we can find Jesus. Oftentimes we think we to find our faith or find Jesus or find peace or find hope or joy or love in comfort, or in escapism, or in all of the things that we try to avoid. We think we will find peace in that, and yet what Jesus shows us on this very night is the place that we will find Jesus is in the place where people are hurting the most. Wherever it's most chaotic, this is where Jesus is, because that's who Jesus came for, those who need it. And whether or not you and I recognize it, we all need it. We play the comparison game to say, well, they might need it more than I do, and so that's where Jesus is to be found. And yet just because someone might have less peace than you doesn't mean that you also don't need the same peace that Jesus offers us on this night. Because God has come to us, Emmanuel, God with us. We can have joy in sorrow. We can have hope in the midst of despair. We can have love in the midst of hurt. We can have a silent night in the middle of the noise. These are the places the Prince of Peace can be found, because this is what he came for. He thought so much of you. He thought so much much of your pain and so much of your hurt and so much of the chaos of your life that he came to be with you, the Prince of Peace, to tell you you're not in this alone. And I've come in to usher a new kingdom, not defined by chaos, but one defined by order and one defined by love and peace. So that when we encounter this Prince of Peace, we are transformed and we are different and can enter into the world like the shepherds with a peace that can't be contained and it can't be stopped by the world around us. We can go to the places where there is no peace because we bring peace with us. Because we have good news of great joy for all the people. For tonight we celebrate in the town of David, in Bethlehem, a small town of no significance. The most significant event in world history has happened, and his name is Jesus, the Prince of Peace. Emmanuel, God with us. And when